Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to my library, your library. And we're going to do a couple more book reviews. It's been a couple months, so it's got a couple of books here I want to go over with you. Starting with the one I just finished this morning, which is Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell. This is about his time serving with the PUM militia during the Spanish Civil War. He was a volunteer during the Spanish Civil War fighting the fascists. Very interesting, especially for what we're dealing with right now when there's a lot of battles with fascists going on. Of course, he focuses more on the internal battles between the anarchists and the communists, anarchists, Trotskyists, and communists, which is also can be very instructive for us. But yeah, if you want to know what happened in Spain, and everybody should know what happened in Spain in the 30s because we're living in similar times right now, then definitely read Homage to Catalonia. Also, you can see how his experience in Spain later colors his understanding, especially of Stalinism, which is why he ended up writing 1984 and Animal Farm. So if you're interested in that kind of literature, definitely read George Orwell, Homage to Catalonia. Also, this morning, just finished reading Leshi. This is another one of the books that my partner and I had gotten so we could study our trip for our trip to Pacific Northwest. A lot of people know about Chief Joseph or the Nez Perce. A lot of people know about Chief Seale or Self, but not very many people know about Leshi. And my theory about this is that while Chief Joseph and Seale were looking for accommodations with white settlers, Leshi was actually fighting them. And so he's been villainized by people at that time, villainized even by history or forgotten by history. So I really wanted to learn who is Leshi, who are the Nisquallies people, what's going on, what was going on at that time. And there's not a lot of books out there. The only one I could really find was this one, and it was written, I think, like in the 50s. And it was written by a white author signed by the author. Didn't really have the kind of sensibilities that we have now when we're writing and talking about Native peoples. So she makes a lot of the errors that I'm going to talk about relating to another book. Another quick recommendation. So I'm still looking for good books about Leshi. If anybody knows I wouldn't recommend this one, but maybe if there's some other ones out there, he's a figure we need to study. Season Time, Bobby Seale. He's one of the founders of the Black Panther Party in Oakland. This book is interesting, also funny at times, very straightforward in the way that he writes. There's a lot of materials written about the Black Panther Party. If you read the main narratives, autobiographies or memoirs of the founders, maybe a comprehensive history and some of the local history, you could do away without a lot of that literature. But this is one that you can't really, get away with not reading. You got to read Season Time by Bobby Seale if you want to know how the Black Panthers were formed. We're going to take a break and then we're going to do the rest of the books. Okay, welcome back to Book Reviews. This is December 2017 on the Gregorian calendar. This book is called Requiem for a People. It's by Stephen Dow Beckham. It's about the historic episode they call the Rogue River Wars, like a lot of the wars between Native Americans and white settlers. They're called Indian Wars, even though they're probably more accurately characterized as massacres. There was a lot of conflict between the Rogue River tribes, which are down in South Oregon, where my family lives, and the white settlers of that region. In fact, some of the characters in the Leschi book go down and fight in these battles too, from Washington. This book, it's got a lot of pictures, which is nice, but overall the narrative is pretty dry, chronological. It doesn't really give you a deep sense of characters or that sort of thing. It's kind of just a history. This is what happened and this is what happened next. But especially if you have family in that area or you know people up in Oregon, this is a really important part of understanding how that particular part of South Oregon got colonized and is the way it is now. And it also gets into a lot of the environmental destruction that was caused by the mining, as part of and after the colonization. So, not the most interesting read, but an important moment in history. This is one that Ingrid and I read together. It's called Mankiller. It's by Chief Wilma Mankiller, of the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, who passed away a couple of years ago. We picked this one up in San Francisco when we went up to visit for my birthday. This is came out very recently in the 2000s, I think. So very modern. Talks about her whole history of her people, the Cherokee people, their forced migration. Talks about how her and her family got basically taken out of, encouraged to move off the reservation into urban settlements. They lived in San Francisco, connected with native communities there. She talks about her brothers and sisters being involved in the takeover of Alcatraz, and then how she comes back and gets involved in running the tribe until she's elected as the first female chief of the Cherokee Nation in modern times. Very touching story. Talks about illness, family, a lot of interesting things. A very powerful woman figure, leader. These books came right around the time of Thanksgiving. One of them is called American Indian Timekeeping Devices. This is distributed by a organization that is dedicated to education and kind of correcting some of the mistakes that our education system and educators make. I definitely wanted to get this one because I've been studying the calendar, the Mesoamerican calendar, especially the sacred calendar. But when you study that, you realize that the days and the weeks and the months and the years are only one way of keeping time. This book talks about keeping hours and things like winter counts that were used among the Plains people, and this pole that they use among the Tondo Odom people. So interesting. It's also got some activities for kids that are learning this stuff. So this is good educational material. I also got from them a book called How to Tell the Difference, a guide to evaluating children's books for anti-Indian bias. This one was really interesting. It's got a lot of examples and counterexamples. Questions to ask in the picture books. In the ABC books, is E for Eskimo, is I for Indian. You know, things that portray entire cultures as flat stereotypes, and that don't distinguish between different nations, that sort of thing. So it's got a lot of good questions to ask. At the very end, they talk about how people keep on asking them for lists, good books and bad books, and they're like, that's not what it's about. We're trying to give you the tools so that you can use as educators and even teach your students to evaluate books, to see how good they are, and how reflective of reality they are. So a very good educational resource here, How to Tell the Difference. Before that, I read this book, Decolonizing Anarchism. It's by Maia Ramnath. The original story is that she gave a book talk at Corazon del Pueblo right after this book was published, and I went to the book talk. I got her to sign the book, and that was the same day that I met one of my comrades from United Voices for the very first time. Then I took this book to the North American Anarchist Studies Network conference in San Francisco, because I was reading it. I had started it. I left it in my car. My car got broken into. They stole my backpack. It had nothing but books in it. So I lost that book. So I got this one again. Oh, this is not signed. But I finally read it, and really shows me the lack of knowledge that I have about the subcontinent, about the politics, about the decolonization process. I mean, everybody knows Gandhi, but who else knows much beyond that? Some anarchists know about Bhagat Singh, but there was a whole lot of anarchist thinkers that came out of that diaspora, or part of that diaspora, especially in the first part of the 20th century, very active in San Francisco and in Europe. And then there were very anarchistic tendencies within the larger decolonization movement at the time of Gandhi. So this book really gets into a lot of that in detail, and also challenges some of the notions that we have about anarchism being a Western philosophy, about how do we characterize decolonization movements, that sort of thing. So I really enjoyed this one. For me, out of AK Press, published by AK Press with collaboration with the Institute for Anarchist Studies, Decolonizing Anarchism. This is a book that I got as a gift. Somebody left it at a restaurant somebody was working at. So it's a book of poetry. It's called Testify by Douglas Manuel. It's very, very modern. It is a kind of a window on the soul of the poet. So you get to learn a lot about his struggles in his relationship and growing up in a mixed race family, kind of being part of the hip hop generation but not really accepted by it. It's not, a must read, but interesting poetry. And this is a little bit old. I didn't make the last book review. I think I just forgot to read it, but this one also my partner and I read together. It's a work of popular science. It's called The Hidden Half of Nature, The Microbial Roots of Life and Health by David R. Montgomery and Anne Biklé. They write basically about bacteria, the bacteria that's in the earth and the bacteria that's mostly in our digestive systems, some of the history about how people learn this stuff, some of that history kind of hidden, as far as the history of science goes. Talks a lot about antibiotics and the unforeseen consequences of using too many antibiotics. Talks a lot about chemical fertilizers like those nitrates and phosphates that were basically mined out of existence, and alternatives, because before chemical fertilizers, people composted and farmed organically, and so the push is kind of towards that natural kind of gardening. And interestingly, they do talk about the relationship between those, the use of industry to generate those chemical fertilizers, and how those really are connected to the war profiteers, towards militarism, towards the manufacture of chemical weapons and explosives, and those histories are very much intertwined. So if you're into science, especially popular science, you can learn a lot from this book. I probably forgot more than I learned because it has that much information. But it's a good read, especially if you're interested in health and science. And that's all of our book reviews for today, so thanks for watching. Any feedback or suggestions are very welcome. Thank you.